He was once the second most powerful man in the Reich, but in his final 24 hours before capture, Hermann Göring wasn't commanding armies, he was running for his life. If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. As the Reich crumbled, Göring's orders revealed both desperation and calculation. Inside the once commanding corridors of his offices, maps were spread across tables, telephones rang intermittently, and messengers scurried to carry urgent instructions. Hermann Göring, long accustomed to power and influence, now faced the imminent collapse of the regime he'd helped to build. His mind oscillated between tactical planning, self-preservation, and the need to maintain the illusion of authority for those still under his command. The audience is immediately drawn into the tension, curious to see how a man who had controlled armies and resources reacts when the very foundation of his world disintegrates. Orders were issued with precision, reflecting both military instinct and personal calculation. Staff were instructed to secure remaining valuables, destroy sensitive documents, and ensure that key personnel reached safety. Göring's concern for appearances, both for subordinates and for his own reputation, revealed a mix of pride and desperation. Each directive was infused with the knowledge that Allied forces were advancing rapidly and that hesitation could cost lives. Viewers experienced suspense, understanding the stakes and the psychological pressure exerted by the collapse of power within the bunker. Göring's interactions with subordinates were a study in leadership under duress. He oscillated between commanding authority and displaying human vulnerability, offering reassurances, issuing sharp reprimands, and at times making decisions that seemed contradictory or impulsive. Diaries, testimonies, and historical accounts describe his frantic pacing, his consultations with aides, and the meticulous attention to every logistical detail. From communications to evacuation routes, the audience gains insight into the mental state of a man confronting the rapid erosion of control, enhancing both historical understanding and psychological intrigue. The weight of responsibility and personal ambition was palpable. Göring's orders were not solely about military strategy. They were also attempts to secure his own survival, including preparation for potential flight or surrender. The tension between duty to remaining forces and self-preservation created an atmosphere thick with uncertainty and moral ambiguity. For viewers, this raises compelling questions about leadership, loyalty, and the human instinct to survive under extreme circumstances. Ultimately, the last orders of Hermann Göring illuminate the final hours of a powerful figure confronted with irreversible collapse. They provide a window into the psyche of a man whose influence had shaped history, now navigating the uncertainty of defeat. The audience is left both informed and engaged. They observe the mechanics of his decision-making, the desperation in his demeanor, and the unfolding tension that will define his final movements. This section sets the stage for the subsequent flight, evasion, and ultimate capture, ensuring that viewers remain immersed in suspense, psychological analysis, and historical context. Every step could determine survival. As enemy forces closed in from every direction, Hermann Göring, aware that Berlin was no longer a safe haven, prepared for his escape with the precision of a man accustomed to power, but now confronted by imminent danger. The streets outside were filled with chaos, crumbling buildings, fleeing civilians, and advancing Allied and Soviet troops. Inside his temporary command centers, aides scrambled to pack essential documents, valuables, and personal effects, all while maintaining secrecy to avoid interception. The audience is immediately immersed in tension. Following a high-ranking fugitive navigating the collapsing capital, the escape was meticulously planned, yet fraught with unpredictability. Göring relied on trusted aides to coordinate routes through lesser-known roads, underground tunnels, and abandoned rail lines. Vehicles were chosen for speed and concealment. Maps were checked and rechecked, and contingency plans were established in case of roadblocks or enemy encounters. The psychological weight of the situation is palpable. Every decision carried the potential for capture or death. For viewers, this generates suspense and emotional engagement. as they witness the intersection of strategy, fear, and human instinct under extreme pressure. As Göring moved through Berlin, the surrounding devastation amplified both danger and urgency. Bombed-out streets, shattered infrastructure, and displaced populations created an unpredictable environment. Allied forces had begun systematic sweeps, and Soviet patrols were closing in from multiple directions. Witness accounts from the period describe the tension among Göring's entourage: anticipation, anxiety, and fleeting moments of hesitation. Viewers experienced the intensity of the moment, imagining the risk and the stakes of each decision made in a city on the brink of total collapse. Concealment was paramount. Göring and his aides employed disguises, false vehicle markings, and secretive timing to evade patrols. Encounters with enemy scouts were navigated through quick thinking, deception, and sometimes sheer luck. Diaries and testimonies suggest that some narrowly avoided capture by slipping through alleys, blending with fleeing crowds, or diverting pursuers with decoy movements. The audience feels suspense and curiosity, understanding the precarious nature of survival in the final hours of the Reich. Ultimately, Göring's departure from Berlin illustrates the fragility of power and the human instinct to survive. Once a commanding figure shaping the course of the war, he became a fugitive navigating a city he had once dominated. The audience is left in suspense, captivated by the blend of strategic calculation, risk, and desperation that defines this flight. This section sets the stage for Chapter 2, where Göring's pursuit, narrow escapes, and interactions with Allied forces will heighten tension, maintain engagement, and explore the psychological and historical dimensions of the final 24 hours. One wrong turn could end everything. Each checkpoint was a test of wit and luck. Hermann Göring, now a fugitive from the ruins of Berlin, navigated a landscape transformed by destruction, chaos, and the relentless advance of Allied forces. Streets once under Nazi control were littered with rubble, abandoned vehicles, and fleeing civilians, creating both obstacles and cover. Every decision, whether to turn down a side street, stop to rest, or signal a convoy, carried the weight of potential capture or death. The audience is immediately engaged, sharing the tension and uncertainty of a man accustomed to authority, but now subjected to the unforgiving rules of survival. Encounters with Allied patrols were frequent and harrowing. Göring's movements were deliberate, calculated to avoid detection. Small groups of soldiers scouted roads. Checkpoints were established at critical intersections, and aerial reconnaissance monitored suspected escape routes. Diaries and post-war testimonies describe moments when Göring's convoy narrowly avoided identification, slipping through narrow alleys or taking forested detours. For viewers, these sequences heighten suspense, creating a sense of shared peril and immediate danger. Luck and quick thinking played a crucial role. At one moment, Göring's group encountered a roadblock manned by Allied infantry. A combination of misdirection, careful timing, and misidentification allowed them to pass without incident. In another instance, signals from local collaborators temporarily diverted pursuing forces, providing a fleeting reprieve. The narrative emphasizes the precarious balance between strategy and fortune, keeping the audience on edge, eager to see which obstacles would prove insurmountable and which would be navigated successfully. The psychological pressure was intense. Göring, accustomed to command and control, now relied on instincts and limited intelligence. Each wrong assessment could have fatal consequences, and the knowledge of potential capture weighed heavily on him and his aides. Observers recount the tension among subordinates, who oscillated between fear, obedience, and silent judgment. The audience experiences both suspense and empathy, understanding the human dimension of fear, strategy, and desperation in a collapsing regime. Ultimately, these narrow escapes underscore the fragility of power in the face of chaos. Hermann Göring's survival relied not on authority but on quick decision-making, resourcefulness, and an uneasy combination of courage and luck. For viewers, this section provides historical immersion, psychological insight, and suspense, drawing them into the high-stakes drama of the final hours before capture. Each checkpoint, each close call, and each calculated risk reinforces engagement, anticipation, and curiosity about what fate will ultimately befall one of the Third Reich's most notorious figures. Across the countryside, the hunters drew nearer, unaware of the desperate fugitive in their path. Hermann Göring, fleeing the ruins of Berlin, moved cautiously through towns and forests, fully aware that every movement risked interception by advancing Allied forces. Intelligence units had pieced together reports of his last known locations. Patrols were sweeping roads, and aerial reconnaissance monitored suspected escape routes. The landscape itself became a perilous obstacle. Bombed-out bridges, collapsed rail lines, and congested roads slowed progress and demanded constant vigilance. Viewers are drawn into suspense, experiencing the relentless pressure and unpredictability of Göring's flight. Göring's escape was a delicate balance of strategy, timing, and concealment. He relied on trusted aides to scout ahead, identify potential dangers, and maintain communication under strict secrecy. Movements were deliberately staggered, often under the cover of night, and frequently changed to avoid patterns that could be detected. Diaries and post-war testimonies reveal moments of near-capture patrols passing mere meters away, travelers spotting suspicious vehicles, and misidentifications that could have ended the fugitive's journey. Each near miss heightens tension for the audience, reinforcing the precariousness of survival under extreme pressure. The approach of Allied forces was methodical. Units coordinated across sectors, combining infantry patrols, cavalry reconnaissance, and intelligence from local informants. Encounters were not always predictable. Göring had to anticipate both organized operations and random chance, relying on quick thinking and luck to navigate through hostile territory. Viewers experience suspense as the narrative conveys the high stakes, the constant possibility of detection, confrontation, or betrayal. Each moment is charged with the psychological strain of evasion, keeping the audience engaged and emotionally invested. The psychological impact on Göring and his entourage was profound. Once a man of absolute authority, he now faced uncertainty and fear, forced to rely on stealth and cunning rather than power and command. Subordinates grappled with loyalty, anxiety, and moral ambiguity, knowing that any misstep could be fatal. For the audience, this provides both emotional and intellectual engagement, exploring human behavior under extreme duress and the transformation from dominant figure to hunted fugitive. Ultimately, the closing in of Allied forces underscores the fragility of power and the intensity of human survival instincts. Hermann Göring's flight through post-war Germany illustrates the convergence of strategy, chance, and psychological pressure. For viewers, this section maintains suspense, highlights historical realism, and deepens immersion into the final hours of a notorious figure. Every patrol sighting, intelligence report, and evasive maneuver reinforces tension, anticipation, and curiosity, compelling the audience to follow the relentless pursuit and wonder what fate awaits in the concluding chapters. From predator to prey, Göring faced the consequences he had long evaded. After days of evasion, navigating a shattered landscape of collapsing infrastructure, Allied forces finally closed in. In a small, isolated location, Göring and his entourage were spotted by a reconnaissance unit, whose swift coordination left the fugitive with no viable escape. Soldiers approached with caution, weapons drawn, and tense anticipation filling the air. The audience is immediately immersed in suspense, witnessing a man who once commanded armies reduced to vulnerability and uncertainty. The arrest was executed with precision. Allied troops carefully surrounded Göring, ordering him to surrender while maintaining defensive positions to prevent any sudden resistance. Witness accounts describe his initial composure giving way to visible anxiety, a stark contrast to the confidence he had exuded in his command posts. Subordinates tried to intervene or negotiate, but the overwhelming presence of armed forces made resistance futile. For viewers, the tension is palpable. Every movement, every word, carries the weight of potential violence and historical consequence. Immediate questioning followed, as Göring was secured and separated from his aides. Intelligence officers sought to ascertain his identity, intentions, and movements during the escape. Each question was met with careful, guarded responses, reflecting both strategy and desperation. Soldiers and civilians present observed the juxtaposition of power lost and authority denied, providing a human dimension to the unfolding drama. The audience is drawn into psychological engagement, understanding the complexity of fear, pride, and survival instincts at this critical moment. Reactions from soldiers and local civilians varied. Some were in awe, recognizing the infamous figure. Others responded with anger or suspicion, aware of the atrocities associated with his name. The juxtaposition of Göring's former dominance and his current vulnerability underscores the narrative tension. For viewers, this creates moral and emotional reflection, considering not only the actions that led to his downfall but also the broader implications of justice and accountability. Cornering and capture of Hermann Göring illustrate the fragility of power and the inevitability of consequences. From commanding vast military resources to being constrained by the presence of a handful of soldiers, Göring's experience highlights the transition from unchecked authority to enforced accountability. The audience experiences suspense, intellectual engagement, and moral contemplation as they follow the transformation of a notorious figure from fugitive to captive. This section establishes the stage for the final phase: interrogation, surrender, and the initial steps toward post-war justice, leaving viewers eager to understand both the human and historical outcomes of the capture. The final 24 hours ended not in power but in the shadow of justice and judgment. Hermann Göring, once the second most powerful man in the Third Reich, found himself confined in a secure Allied facility, stripped of authority and surrounded by those tasked with holding him accountable. His mind, accustomed to issuing commands and shaping policy, now wrestled with uncertainty, fear, and the anticipation of interrogation. For the audience, this moment generates suspense and moral contemplation, observing the stark reversal of fortune for a man who had orchestrated immense destruction. Göring's detention was meticulous. Guards ensured he was isolated, monitored constantly, and denied the comforts and freedoms he once took for granted. Intelligence officers prepared comprehensive dossiers, detailing his crimes, wartime decisions, and complicity in atrocities. Each record, each photograph, and each piece of evidence formed a psychological net, pressing upon Göring as he awaited questioning. Viewers are drawn into tension and anticipation, understanding that his personal and political legacy was now subject to scrutiny and judgment. Interrogation sessions began with calculated intensity. Officers sought to uncover details about Nazi operations, collaborators, and escape attempts. Göring, ever the strategist, offered measured responses, navigating between truth, obfuscation, and self-preservation. Diaries, testimonies, and post-war analyses describe the careful reading of his demeanor, the pauses and the subtle shifts in posture and tone, all of which were scrutinized for insight. The audience experiences intellectual engagement, piecing together historical facts, while empathizing with the psychological strain of a figure stripped of his power. The anticipation of trial weighed heavily on Göring. The Nuremberg tribunals loomed as both a legal reckoning and a moral judgment, promising exposure, accountability, and potentially severe consequences. Historical context underscores the significance. Göring was not merely a political figure, but a symbol of a regime responsible for systematic atrocities. This tension engages the audience's ethical reflection, prompting them to consider questions of justice, responsibility, and human behavior under extreme circumstances. Ultimately, facing justice transformed Göring from architect of terror to subject of law and history. His detention and interrogation highlight the mechanisms through which societies seek accountability, the psychological challenges faced by those confronted with the consequences of their actions, and the moral lessons embedded in historical processes. For viewers, this section provides resolution, suspense, and intellectual engagement, bridging the gap between dramatic historical events and enduring ethical questions. The audience is left reflecting on power, responsibility, and the intricate interplay of human decision-making and societal justice. while anticipating the unfolding of legal and historical closure in the narrative's subsequent chapters.